When we opened the windows and everything, water started coming inside, so many high waves that was hitting the boat. We heard a few cracks, but we didn't mind because the captain was like, "You're gonna make it fine." On the third day, really bad waves happened as well. And then the fourth day, it was completely fine. And then the night, it cracked. The boat cracked.
Noura is only 15 years old. She describes the harrowing trip that she and her family took aboard an unequipped smuggler boat trying to get to Europe. What was supposed to be a 7-day journey was interrupted when their boat began to fall apart. Noura, whose name we changed to protect her identity, sprung into action and called the rescue boats.
I remember I was all the numbers ahead because I knew this was going to happen. And then the boat came, saved us, and brought us to Greek. When we went to the bigger boat, 40 seconds, I'm saying 40 seconds, but that's maximum. 40 seconds later, the boat was into pieces. So we were really lucky.
Lucky. It's a near-death experience, but Noura knows that compared to the many who have drowned attempting to make the deadly journey across the Mediterranean and other sea routes, survival is a gamble. Still, more than 200,000 migrants and refugees take this risk every year. Thousands like Noura are from Iraqi Kurdistan. The consequences have been bleak. Last year, more than 2,200 migrants were reported dead or missing at sea, and this includes children. After a series of challenging journeys across multiple borders, by boat, land, and air, Noura, her parents, and 2 young sisters are now in northern France, but their ultimate goal is to reach the UK. But despite nearly dying, this part may be the most complicated in their journey.
I've tried more than 6 times. Most of my attempts I've walked 13 hours, and it's really stressful, no sleep, no food, running out of food and everything. Police is catching us.
That's more than 6 times that Noura and her family have tried to cross the English Channel in a boat from their safe house in northern France to get to the UK. Each time, they're faced with a different obstacle. She'll try one more time, she says, but the toll of it all already cuts too deep.
Since I've been moving out of my country, my dreams has all been crushed because of how stressful and hectic it is. Throughout this whole moving thing, I've lost all of my personality traits. I don't even know what my favorite color is now. So I want to get my old self back. I want to live in a beautiful house with all my family and everyone's healthy.
This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada AlTaher. In this week's episode, our team of reporters at The National investigate the increasingly risky journey that Iraqi Kurds are attempting to reach the UK and the intricate smuggler network that exploits their desperation for profit. We also look at the efforts and consequences of crackdowns by British authorities. Can you tell us about your journey to seeking Noura and your impression of her when you met her?
We met Noura in a safe house for vulnerable migrants in northern France.
Sunniva Rose is part of the investigation team at The National that's been covering this story for months now. She had been scouting the informal camps around the beach in a northern French town where migrants in transit camp out in tents in already dire conditions. It's muddy, there's no electricity, and it can be dangerous.
So it's not a family-friendly environment. And the most vulnerable of those people get to, if there's space, stay in this big house. And that's where we found Noura with her family. All her sisters also speak really good English. They do maths problems together. They're just really bright students and they want better education. And that's one of the reasons her family decided to leave Sulaymaniyah in Iraq, is they thought the education system wasn't good enough for their daughters. And they have family in the UK and they keep telling them life is great here and you should come.
They talk about how amazing the school system is, how amazing it is, like women have their rights and everything. Having family and having someone to guide you in where to live is amazing, so that's why we choose the UK.
A family member is actively telling them, you guys should come to the UK because we have much better lives here and we've done this journey and you should do it too, kind of thing.
How did they even get to northern France, Noura and her family? What routes did they take?
So they took a bus to Turkey, and then they took a boat to get to Greece and Italy, and then they took a train to northern France. But there was a major incident on the way to Italy. The boat nearly capsized. And Nora, because she's a really good speaker, like she speaks really good English, people around her who don't speak good English tend to rely on her. And at least the way she described it, she seemed to play an important role in talking to the police and coordinating the rescue of the boat. And she came out of it really traumatized, and she's afraid of water now. So it's actually one of the reasons their attempts failed recently when they were trying to cross into the UK from northern France, because she said, I got into the water, was up to my knees, and I had a panic attack. I was like, no way, I'm not doing this. So they've been now also 3 months in France. Because there's not just the bit where she had a panic attack. There's also times when smugglers just disappear. The police comes and slashes the boats. And you also have to wait for the right weather to be able to cross.
What did Noura actually tell you about that journey when the boat nearly capsized? How many people were there on the boat? How did they get rescued eventually? Where were they?
She described it as a small yacht that had 2 rooms in it, and it was like 12 meters wide.
There was 81 people in a 12-meter boat, so it's really hard to breathe.
And you couldn't go outside?
No, it was not allowed, because they said that there's going to be drones around, they're going to see the family. We didn't have enough oxygen. My mom's body ran out of 50% of oxygen. It was really dangerous.
When they opened the windows, water started coming inside the boat, and there was really high waves, and they could hear the boat cracking. In the end, they were brought to Greece. She said she left all her clothes on the boat. She didn't even have shoes on. Her mom was unconscious, and she was having these thoughts of like, what's going to happen if my mom dies? Do I have to become the mom to my 2 little sisters? And then they got to Greece and they spent a night in prison, which is what happens a lot. Even in France, when migrants are stopped by the police, they get interrogated basically, and then they spend the night in prison and sleep there. And then they're usually released afterwards, after a day or 2 days.
So Noura has ended up in, like you said, a safe house for migrants like herself that was set up by a former NGO worker. But what happens to most of the other migrants who are not as lucky?
When I went, it was very cold. It was very muddy. It was mostly men, very few women, very few children. And it's quite violent. I think a few weeks ago in January, there was a man who was found dead in a ditch. Like you have fights within the community because life is so hard and so tense. And you also have smuggler networks who are kind of in competition with each other. There are Kurds, but there's also Albanians and Vietnamese and all these different networks who are kind of competing to control access to certain parts of certain beaches. So it's quite violent.
How did these migrants actually find the smugglers then?
Well, the way Nora mentioned it, she said before leaving, they have family members back in Iraq who try to find a smuggler who has a network of smugglers that he works with in northern France from Iraq that the family knows.
We find them out by families or relatives. They usually came from the country we came from. So when something happens to us, they can have someone to talk to. And no one sees the smuggler by just calling through WhatsApp. And then after that, you go to the jungle. They show you a guy who has all of the maps, knows the location of where the boat is and everything. And then that guy leads you to where you need to be. You go to the checkpoint near the sea, and then you go on the boat.
So they don't know who the most important guy in the network is. They never meet him or anything. It's kind of like hearsay. And I heard this guy is good, but you can trust him and stuff like that.
So who exactly is running these smuggler networks? Where do they operate and who are their ringleaders? Aveen Karim is part of the investigation team that looked into this. She traveled to the Kurdistan region of Iraq to try and track down some of these groups. I asked her what she was able to uncover. The National's investigation examined court documents from trials of smugglers that trace back to smuggling operations in Iraqi Kurdistan. Aveen, you traveled there in hopes of chasing down some of the big names there, but it was a bit more complicated than that. Tell us what happened when you got there.
Yeah, that's right. So we went to Rania and Qaladze, which are 2 of the towns known for being hotspots for finding smugglers. And they're also the towns where a lot of the migrants traveling to Europe come from. These smugglers were not always very secretive about what they were doing. They would post videos on Facebook and posts, and that's how people would find them, or you would find them around the town or in parks. But what happened this time when we visited, we went a few weeks after the UK's National Crime Agency carried out a few raids in the town, in Rania, and arrested some of the people who were involved in the whole smuggling network. So we were met with a bit of hostility from people there. They were very reluctant to speak. You could tell they were quite afraid of what had happened and of maybe being caught. We had a bit of trouble while we were going through the town. It seemed like some people were following us around the park where we were trying to speak to people. But yeah, they followed us with their car, basically followed us out of the town.
So the smugglers were openly carrying out their activities, but then went into hiding after these arrests?
So the UK is really cracking down on these smuggling gangs because they want to stop illegal migration, because a lot of them are heading towards the UK. And as they call it, they want to stop the small boats. So they've been coordinating with authorities in Kurdistan to stop this and to track them down. So they carried out a few raids. UK agents physically go on the ground and arrest people. And actually, the Facebook videos posted by the smugglers were how the UK found them to arrest them. It was an open secret in a way, if we can call it that. What people told us around the town was that we were looking for we had a few smuggler names, particularly Bakhtiar, one of the nicknames of one of the smugglers that we were looking for. So people were telling us that they've gone into hiding, or they've crossed into Iran, or they're just laying low at the moment.
So how did people feel about knowing that there are smugglers among them?
In a strange way, it's sort of a normal thing in the town. A lot of the local businesses are involved in it as well. You have all the different money shops, exchanges, travel agencies that sort of collaborate and do this. And there's a strong will among the people to leave to Europe. So it's just kind of a known fact that this happens, and you can easily find it if you need the services.
You mentioned Bakhtiar. Who is he, and what were you able to learn about him during your visit? Did you go in search of him?
Yeah, so he was one of the names that came up through different stages of the story, which is quite interesting. It's like he's a recurring character. You have his name come up in the UK, in France as well. And so when we mentioned it in Rania, it was like you were mentioning, I don't know, a TV star or something. It seemed like everyone knew who Bakhtiar was. I don't know if no one knew or if they didn't want to tell what his real name was. We found his shop in Rania. It's named Qandil, after the mountains nearby. And when we went there, there were two young boys who were working at the cashier in the shop, and they said they hadn't heard from him since the recent raids, and they didn't know where he was. I don't know if that's true or not. They also said that they don't have a phone number, which is very hard to believe. But they were very adamant that they don't know where his whereabouts are. Some other people in the town were saying that he most likely crossed into Iran. Rania is not very far from Iran. It's about an hour's drive, and the border there is quite porous, so it's quite easy to cross in and out.
Can you explain to us why Bakhtiar has a shop? I mean, what does this shop do? Do you approach that shop when you want to be smuggled out of the country, or what exactly is it for?
This is the one that we found. We don't know if there's any other businesses that he has, but this is the one that was kind of well known among the people. It's actually a money exchange. It's a front. So there's a lot of these money shops. It goes back to like what's called the hawala system, and it's known there. So for example, if you're looking for these services, if you want to leave to Europe, or you've already found a smuggler and have established contact, you don't usually pay the smuggler directly. So these act as a sort of like broker in a way, as sort of a front. You go, you leave the money with the money shop. Once you arrive safely, they then pass on the money to the smuggler. In some cases, I mean, if you don't make it, if you have a previous agreement, they'll hand it back to your family or whoever you choose the money to go back to. Obviously, when we asked them about it, they acted as if they had never heard of such a business.
Where do the security forces come in?
Now the security forces are more actively involved in it because they're working together with the UK. The reason why security forces were not actively cracking down on this before is because the law of the Kurdistan region of Iraq there isn't a law that actually criminalizes migrant smuggling. So that's one of the things that we've been told by the UK that is underway now. Now security forces, because there's more pressure, they are cracking down on it. And someone else from a different money shop nearby told us that they've been given warnings by Asaish, which is the local security forces, and have been told to make sure that they do not engage in anything that has to do with migrant smuggling anymore.
What prompts anyone in Rania to want to be smuggled out of the country?
Local NGOs told us it's sort of become a trend now to leave to Europe, particularly as a young man, because there are very little opportunities for work in Rania. And it's not just a problem in Rania. In a lot of different towns in the region that are very disenfranchised, you typically have to go to the bigger cities like Erbil or Suleymania for jobs, which even there at the moment, the economic situation is not great. For them, it seems like the only way out or the easy way out is to try and leave in search for a better life. They're very convinced that there is a much better life elsewhere in Europe, particularly in the UK, because there are a lot of Kurds who have historically migrated. So it's always just this perception that life is so much better. And I think UK is probably one of the ideal locations.
Ever wondered what it feels like to be a gladiator, facing a roaring crowd and potential death in the Colosseum? Find out on the Ancients podcast from History Hit. Twice a week, join me, Tristan Hughes, as I hear exciting new research about people living thousands of years ago, from the Babylonians to the Celts to the Romans, and visit the ancient sites which reveal who and just how amazing our distant ancestors were. That's the Ancients from History Hit.
But also there's more of a judicial crackdown. There was a big court case back in November that I went to in Lille in northern France, where there was a smuggling network on trial, and they were basically nearly all Iraqi Kurdish.
This is Suniva again. She was able to get a hold of court records of a particularly high-profile case of one of the smuggling networks.
And one guy, the ringleader, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. I was told by lawyers that's quite a lot. The sentences are becoming tougher. But the guy had been in prison for years anyway for some other issue, and he had been apparently controlling the whole thing from prison. And it's really hard even to stop them, even if you tell them you're going to spend 10 years in prison. Like, that doesn't seem to be a deterrent. And French investigators, regarding that guy who got 15 years, French investigators said that he made every year more than $3.5 million. That's a lot.
Simultaneously, there was a trial going on of two Kurdish guys in the UK, in Wales specifically. Now, they ran a car wash.
This is the National's Nada AlTaher. He has been connecting the dots of smuggler networks from Iraqi Kurdistan to northern France to the UK. His investigation led him to this seemingly normal business in Wales that turned out to be not so normal.
They ran a car wash, which was a front for their people smuggling operation. Now, what was interesting about these guys is that they never put anybody in boats. They never put anybody in cars. What they did was effectively act as travel agents. They took money from migrants, they gave it to smugglers, and they arranged using mobile technology for the two to meet up and for everybody to be in the right place, for example, using pin drops at borders. Now, during the trial, which I sat in on, it actually emerged that one of their money exchanges was also operating in Rania, which is where Bakhtiar was operating from. So at that point, we had a connection. We were able to sort of draw the threads together and really begin to explore why this place has become such a center for people smuggling.
So how do they use these shops as fronts? How do they get away with it?
One interesting aspect of it is that the guys running the car wash, they would get migrants themselves to actually produce videos, like that were essentially reviews of the service, which investigators call TripAdvisor-style reviews. You can imagine these migrants were on these boats smiling and giving the thumbs up, saying, trust these guys, they're great, amazing. So that gives you an extent to which it is an organized business. So we've got two steps. You've got two guys who are essentially beneath the radar. Then you've got gangs in northern France who operate through fear and violence. And another aspect of it was the financial aspect of this, because they use the Hawala system. Now, because no money is actually exchanging hands directly, it actually fits perfectly into the business model of migrants, of people smuggling. To begin with, migrants can cross borders without having to take huge quantities of cash. And for the people smugglers themselves, the two guys in Wales used a Hawaladar 3,000 miles away to conduct their business, all on this system of trust.
Why has the UK decided to use a more heavy-handed approach to really crack down on these networks? And has there been a change in legislation that has allowed them to do so now?
The problem with people smuggling has really snowballed since about 2018. In 2022, it reached its peak. In response to that, the previous Conservative government brought in this scheme whereby people would be sent to Rwanda to deter them. It's modelled on an Australian system where they sent people offshore to be processed. And the idea this was going to act as a deterrent. Now, that ran into difficulties in the courts here, and there was all sorts of concerns about whether Rwanda was a safe country. So the incoming Labour government, it decided to adopt a criminal justice approach, essentially to go after the gangs. And as the consequences of that have been that they have set up a border security command. So bringing law enforcement together, essentially, as they say it, to treat people smuggling as terrorism. What they're going to do, there's a new border security bill which is coming in, which will allow law enforcement to essentially stop people smuggling when there's a suspicion. You can get a court order to, for example, prevent them from using mobile phones and computers if it's been proven that a people smuggler has, for example, or an individual has been researching people smuggling, where to buy boats. Because so much of it is based or is focused on Iraqi Kurdistan. At the end of last year, the British Home Secretary, she went out to Iraqi Kurdistan and Iraq as well, and signed an agreement with both the federal government and the regional government for UK law enforcement to be operating in the Kurdistan region. If they see somebody operating who's part of a network that has a link to Britain, they can interdict it before it gets to the UK. Now, whether that'll work remains to be seen.
For migrants who choose to take this risky journey, has it made them any safer? Is there any evidence that the crackdowns have deterred them in any way at all?
There's one word for that, that's no. I mean, it's early days. So far this year, I think we've seen 2,000 people coming across every day. There isn't any sign so far that we've seen of this tailing off. It's a difficult one to judge immediately. Smugglers are very resilient people. They'll be looking for a way to get around this, to maybe improve their own way of operating. That means that they don't fall under suspicion. So it just remains to be seen, really, what's happening. But that's why this investigation comes at such a prescient time, really.
Even though the ringleaders may be laying low for the time being, stricter policing, stronger legislation, and harsher judicial campaigns seem to be having a ripple effect across all parts of the smuggling operation, in the UK, in France, and in Iraqi Kurdistan.
The issue is that the more police there is, the more violence there is also with smuggler networks, and also the more smugglers adapt to the police. So, for example, there's also the issue, one NGO said, that because it's becoming so dangerous, I mean, there's so much more police, smugglers are trying to cram more people on each boat. The average number of people on an 8-meter-long small boat has increased from 27 in 2021 to more than 60 in 2025. And even they said now they see departures from the city of Dieppe, which is 135 kilometers from the UK, instead of Sangatte, which is just 37 kilometers. The longer the journey, the more dangerous it is as well.
Targeting the smuggling gangs is not necessarily the answer to stopping this issue. This is a very, very dangerous route that people take. Just a few days ago, you had another boat sink in the English Channel. Most of them were Kurds. There needs to be more engagement with the population to understand why they're leaving and to address these issues, because even speaking to locals there, they know what's happening in terms of the crackdown and the arrests, but that doesn't change their desire to leave.
And they know how dangerous that is.
And they know how dangerous it is. But it's a risk that they're willing to take, and often put younger members of their family, like their children, at this risk. Cracking down on these gangs is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a larger wound that needs to actually be healed properly, because people still want to leave. And even though they were telling us there's no smugglers at the moment because they're laying low, but they're still going to find alternatives.
That's it for Beyond the Headlines. Visit thenationalnews.com for the full investigation of smuggling networks operating from Iraqi Kurdistan. This story was reported by Nada AlTaher, Aveen Karim, and Suniva Rose. It was edited by Paul Carey and Damon McElroy. This episode was produced by Ban Barqawi and audio engineered by Arthur Edison. Yasmin Al-Taji is our assistant producer and Dua Farid is our editor. And I'm your host, Nada AlTaher.